Hey guys! So for this week's map adventure, we went somewhere that I know, somewhere that I don't need a map for because it's where I grew up. And because even though I know Tahoe Pines like the back of my hand, that doesn't mean that I know everything that there is to know about it. Just because I know where all the houses are, the roads, the streets, the volcano. Yeah, you heard that right. There's a volcano. Literally, like in the backyard of where I grew up. We climb it all the time. We're cool like that. But just because you know a place, do you really know it? How well do you know the neighborhood you grew up in? So break out your hiking shoes, get out your best cabin wear, and watch out for bears because we're gonna go home to Tahoe Pines. So without any further ado, I present to you the story of Tahoe Pines told in a whimsical, extremely entertaining, and amazing way by one Miss Harmony Haywood. We're going to take it back, like way back, to when Tahoe Pines had a population of 1. And that 1 was none other than Hampton Craig Blackwood. H.C. Blackwood pioneered his way to the West Shore after trying his hand at silver. Wrong place. Well, kind of. You see, he came over for the Great Squaw Valley Phantom Silver Strike.
We're at Squaw Valley, an oblong saucer over 6,000 feet above sea level in the heart of the Sierra Nevada. What brings this most exciting and colorful of all to this place, known up till now to just a few locals?
Where he and his closest 2,000 friends rushed to the newly formed town of Clairville that sits kind of where the Olympic Valley sign sits today. Where it had been reported that the silver mines were richer than the Comstock. And just like that, the $10 lots sold for $24. For those of you who don't like math, that's $200 a lot. And that's not 2022 $200, that's 1859 $200, which is like, it's like a lot. The only problem is it was Comstock grade silver, literally, because Kaiser and Knox salted the mines with Virginia City silver in order to sell the worthless land that they'd required. And as 1,996 people prepared to leave with their tail between their legs, Blackwood and his 3 best friends decided to try their luck with the then uncharted West Shore Lake Tahoe. And with no road past Tahoe City available, the 4 friends bushwhacked their way down the West Shore, each taking a homestead on a creek. You might know some of these friends. First, we have Homer Burton of Burton Creek. You know him, the guy who supposedly caught the largest fish in Tahoe history at a whopping 29 pounds. As the story goes, he sent it to the President Grant, who ate it for Christmas dinner. Next up, we have Ward Rush, the famous recluse who supposedly lived to a creepy, unrealistic age, who homesteaded at Ward Creek. Followed by his very good friend, John McKinney of McKinney Bay fame, who would go on to find the best bar in Tahoe, Chambers Landing. And last but never least, Hampton Craig Blackwood of Blackwood Creek fame, who acquired 368 acres of prime real estate via the Homesteaders Act. The ever industrious Blackwood immediately set out to make some money, and that money came in the form of sheep. Wait, what? You heard that right, sheep. Upon seeing the lush meadow, endless timothy grass and bunch clover, he called upon an old friend named William Andrew Barker, who owned a lucrative sheep ranch in Oroville, California. And just like that, the two went into the sheep business together. All summer and spring, they ran Barker's stock up the now named Blackwood Canyon, then drove them down to the Sacramento Valley in the fall, which started quite the trend because it was estimated in 1903 that 100,000 sheep were grazing the Tahoe National Forest. The 2 men pioneered the first road linking the West Shore to the rest of the world, further allowing for travelers to see the magical West Shore when their road linked up to the newly made Georgetown Lake Bigler Toll Road. After 18 years in California, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood had 7 children, half of Barker's sheep business, a very lucrative ranch supply business, which he ran from his dairy farm located at the end of Grand Avenue in Tahoe Pines. The very hard winter of '71 had proved too much for the Blackwoods, and they decided to head to Washington to trade in snow for rain. And he sold his holdings, property, and interest in the sheep business to fellow Sacramento sheeper Thomas McConnell. And Thomas McConnell had big, big plans for the newly christened McConnells Tahoe. Thomas McConnell purchased Blackwood's 388 acres of prime Tahoe real estate, which included 2 miles of beachfront stretching from Eagle Rock to what would become Homewood. McConnell built a new swanky rustic cabin and laid out one of the area's first retreats. Catering to the 1% of the 1%, McConnells had picnic grounds in the forest and on the lake, where guests were served 5-star meals by the in-house staff, a dance floor underneath the pines, summer cottages, and a steamer wharf where the 1% could arrive for their primitive backwoods Tahoe Pines experience, which was the only way to reach McConnell's swanky resort in style. Amongst his guests were presidents, senators, and Judge Crocker and his wife. The Crockers purchased part of McConnell's land in 1880 and immediately proceeded to build one of the finest cottages on the lake, which one Miss Nellie Crocker dubbed Idlewild. And the Crocker sisters, Nellie and Amy, were quickly making their primitive summer retreat the place to see and be seen, with anyone pining to be a guest of her vacation getaway, where they would peacefully swing on hammocks while being served by the in-house staff, or go on a quaint boat ride on her modest steamer ship, or be invited to one of her lavish parties where they could socialize amongst the pines. And the Crocker girls were known for throwing their parties, like the time Nellie threw a...
Did I just read that right?
She threw a coon party?
Wow.
You may be mad, but you won't laugh 'cause your mama.
I'm not sure where to go with that one.
On the guest list of these modest coon parties were little-known names such as Winston Churchill and some guy named President Woodrow Wilson.
Idlewild had become the only decent place the modest millionaire could spend their summers. First up was Senator Birdsall, who completed his palatial cottage in the spring of 1881. The papers reported it as the most expensive cottage on the lake, with an outrageous price tag of $3,000. And it blew the Crocker's summer cabin out of the water. And building a modest palatial summer cabin wasn't the only contribution that Senator Birdsall made to the area. After winning the election in 1909, he set out to make his vision of a road capable of accommodating automobiles around the entire lake.
Which encircles a beautiful vista of Lake Tahoe for motorists driving through the tunnel.
Laying out plans to connect it from the west shore to the south shore over what was thought the impossible Emerald Bay. And with the turn of the century, there was big change to the fashionable Idlewild. In the summer of 1905, the Coles bought the Crocker estate and moved it into a new era. But literally, they actually moved it to the base of Eagle Rock where it sits today and built themselves a new palatial Tahoe mansion. And with the new and improved road came people, lots of people.
Our vacation trip to the far west state starts in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
And for the first time, Tahoe was accessible to the average person. In 1909, Merkley, Chettenden, and Keller began offering special excursions for $6 round trip. Where, you ask? I'm so glad you asked. To freshly laid out lots on unquestionably the choicest location on the lake, giving you the opportunity to own your own summer home adjoining Idlewild on the healthful, beautiful, grand, exhilarating, invigorating, life-giving climate of Lake Tahoe, California's scenic wonderland. Whew. Now, if that's not a description, I don't know what is. And what were they offering? Half-acre lots for $100, 1-acre lots for $200, 10% down, $5 a month, no interest, no taxes, free water. No cash, no problem. They'll even exchange for automobiles. But you better act fast because the first 10 lots sold in 3 days, 25 lots sold in 1 week, 42 in 2 weeks, Half of the 150 lots were sold within 3 weeks, 86 in 1 month, 95 in 5 weeks, and all 150 lots were sold within 3 months, netting $50,000. And what could you do with your lot? You could pitch a tent, build a lodge or a bungalow, whatever you want. Wait, there was a pool? May 4th, 1912, Tahoe Pines Post Office opened its doors servicing Tahoe Tavern, Idlewild, and Tahoe Pines communities, with Joseph J. Rossborough as postmaster. Now, you guys know Joseph Rossborough. He's the one whose wife would throw all those lovely bridge parties. Speaking of parties, how great was that tally-ho party that Mrs. Rosenberg threw? Oh, and who could forget the 500 Bull's Head breakfast that Mrs. Morse threw? That was a good time. Back to the post office. Ernie Pomeen was appointed as assistant postmaster. Interesting fact about Ernie, he would go on to work for the Tahoe Pines Post Office for the next 38 years, eventually becoming postmaster himself in 1929 and retiring in 1950. In those days, mail patches were made up in Tahoe City and were sent by packet boat. Tahoe Pines was the first stop on the daily route, usually getting its mail by 10 a.m. Later that year, in 1912, Tahoe Pines opened up a general store and had been elevated to a status of town. And this small town became so popular that the post office had to double its size just to keep up. After all the buzz and excitement, things finally slowed down a bit. The Tahoe Tavern closed its doors. There just weren't enough year-round residents in Tahoe Pines to support a post office. And finally, it shut its doors in 1959, transferring service to Homewood. A walk through Tahoe Pines today is walking through 150 years of history, where you can still see Blackwood's cabin, where it still sits on his dairy farm. And you can go look at the Crocker's house that sits right at the base of Eagle Rock. A walk along the Tahoe Pines beach is reminiscent of the days when McConnell had his dance floor underneath the stars.
And the guests would arrive by steamer ship.
Or you can follow in President Woodrow Wilson's footsteps and climb to the top of Eagle Rock. I guess what they say is true.
Life's just a little bit better in Tahoe Pines. Bears. Lots of bears. When they're not breaking into your house.
Meanwhile, a bear turned burglar. A wild 500-pound bear broke into a home in Lake Tahoe. And this is not the first time.
Or breaking into your kitchen.
Beside the mournful river, I paced to and fro, afraid of tomorrow.
Or breaking into your car.
A slave to my sorrow.
Or pretty much doing anything they can to yogi some food out of you. They're not that bad. They're just
giant cinnamon bears.